Good evening, and welcome to this year's Aga Khan Lecture in Architecture. We've been fascinated here to watch the sort of explosion over the past couple of decades of Chinese architecture and urbanism. I just want to relate, just to give you a couple of markers. For example, in 1980 was when Jack Portman, who's John Portman's son, first moved to Hong Kong, learned Mandarin, and started what would become the Shanghai Center project, which opened a decade later in 1990. That was, first of all, it was one of the, it was the single most influx of foreign currency in a building in China ever, up until that time. And it was 8 years before Zhang Ke graduated from GSD, just to keep that marker in our hand. And then, of course, it did sort of explode after that. 2002, the CCTV headquarters with OMA started, wasn't finished until 2012. And then in 2008, of course, were the Summer Olympics in Beijing, which I think for a lot of us became a kind of peak in a certain way, let's say a peak of the playground period for Western architects in China in some way, to maybe be a little too critical of it. But it was when these objects, these stunningly original objects began to appear in China. Not to mention the building of all the new cities. But it's in that context that Zhang Ke founded his studio, Zhao, Standard Architecture, in 2001, just 3 years after he graduated from the GSD. We were talking, I get to explain that Zhao is, I imagined, I kept looking up what I thought was a Chinese pronunciation, things like the morning sun, or, you know, purification, things like, because I mispronounced it, of course. It just means Zhang's architecture office. It's Z-A-O, Zhang's architecture office, but no, but it, but it also, if you pronounce it correctly, means building, which is, so it has that kind of mystery. And Zhang's architecture office has emerged as one of the most important sort of protagonist offices in China among the new generation of Chinese architects, representing, and I don't quite know how to characterize this, they seem exceedingly contemporary. There's a kind of aura of contemporaneity, but at the same time highly sensitive to locale, to material, and also to tradition, and it's strikingly so. But I say that because I don't think we're even close to theorizing what's happening with this generation in China, and that's what fascinates me. So when Kenneth Frampton comes here, as he did recently with our exhibition of Chinese architecture, I mean, of course there's the critical regionalism model, but that won't be enough. It won't be enough because it's not historical. It doesn't accommodate this history of these markers and this interaction of East and West. So I think we still have a long way to go. Ke will show us examples tonight of the Hutongs and the courtyard transformation projects right in the city center of Beijing, which he sort of carefully crafts in those sites, as well as various buildings embedded in the Tibet landscape, buildings that both accommodate this need and this desire for tourism and for sustainable growth, but at the same time are deeply respectful of their context. And it's here that Ke has already won a place to come back and lecture in our critical conservation area in IMDES, because I look forward to seeing those projects in that sense too. In 2015, Ke won or his office won the prestigious Aedes Architekturforum in Berlin, well, an award to receive an exhibition, a solo exhibition of the works of his office. His work has also been featured in the Venice Biennale, the MAC in Vienna, the Dom in Frankfurt, and the Victoria and Albert in London. It's published in a number of places. And he has many honors both in China and in the United States and in Europe, but I mentioned in particular the Aga Khan Award in architecture for 2016. He received his Master's of Architecture, as I said, from the GSD in 1998. Ke is here, and for that we thank you and welcome you, Ke. Zhang Ke.
Many thanks, Michael. Actually, it's also good. It's also true that Zhao also means to be early. You know, that's what I always have problem with. So it's another way to remind. Now I remember. I'm super happy to be here today. And also, it's an honor to do a lecture as an Aga Khan lecture. I'm going to structure my lecture on. I see Peter there, also Peter Rowe there. So, and he was the one that actually got me here, I think, as the first Tsinghua student directly. So as three parts, I would say one part is the Tibetan theory, which we did since 2007, and the second part is back to the center of Beijing city, the urban renewal interventions. And the third part would be a series of more experimental beyond these two series, and some built, some are not built. I would start about an idea that nowadays, no matter how discourses, debates, concepts are global, and ideas are extremely global, exchanged, flowing. It's also the trends. But at the same time, architecture remains to be a very local practice after all, which means that to build in any place, we have to draw in certain degree the resources, inspirations, in some places stronger, some places less, but we have to deal with the place. And if we use the resources and the availability of resources of the place, that's going to gain a lot of advantage rather than disadvantage for architecture, because nowadays images are recycled so easily. But then architecture, the advantage of architecture is to experience, you have to go there. That's why I think to utilize the resources in different locations and cultures in an innovative way becomes a lot of inspiration for our buildings. How do I press? Okay. So I cannot see anything on this screen, so I have to watch there. In 2007, when okay, good. When almost everyone, all the architects are rushing to the city to build for Olympic and things, we partially because we don't have much projects to do, so we went to this Tibetan plateau. You see here, this is the Lingzhi area, and then you have Bhutan, Nepal here, Afghanistan here. So we did a series of projects in this Yalun Tsampu Grand Canyon region. And later we also did a few master plan projects for at this 4,800 average level of alley area, which I'm not going to show that part, but mainly focusing on this. The first building we built was this small boat terminal along the Yalun-Tsampu River, almost located at the entrance of the Grand Canyon. Here you can see this the main peak of the Nanchabawa. Of course, this boat terminal the concept of it is very simple, because the water of the Yalun-Tsampu River, in different seasons it varies for 8 meters. So this is like almost the middle. So at the high point it goes to here, and low point it goes to somewhere here. So it's 8 meters of height difference. So to build a small boat terminal, we have to start with the ramp so that the dock will be able to adjust to the different height. And then since we start with the ramp, of course we had this ramp going through, winding through the trees, and then winding over itself, cantilever back to into the mountain, where you can see the Nanchabawa and also Gala Berry on the other side. We were very lucky because we got, in the beginning I went to hiking for 3 days with this Ouyang friend without knowing that we're getting these projects. And I was almost dead after 3 days hiking. And then he said, "You have to do these projects for me." And and then I said, "Well, it's very dangerous, because if you don't do it well, you got notorious." But then he said, "If you don't do it, somebody will ruin it anyway." So it's kind of a responsibility. I said, "Okay, let's do it." So everything was done in about, from selecting the site to finish, it was, for this first building, was only 10 months. So it was extremely short period. In that kind of time frame urgency, I thought it would be good to actually, we were designing not just one building, we're designing a series of buildings at the same time for this alley. So I thought to myself, so it would be good to establish a kind of consistency, which is either material or structural or a strategic consistency that will be applied no matter how the building's function is. So of course it's very natural to have this idea of the local houses where they use just very humble material, stone and wood and etc. So this is how this first small boat terminal was. And you can see here there are just 3 parts. One part is the waiting room for the boat to arrive or just arrived, and then the second part is the toilet. The third part is the part that cantilever into the river, the Yalun-Tsampu River. Of course, sometimes the weather goes so bad that you have to stay overnight. So that this room is for passengers to stay overnight. On the plan, it's very simple. It's this ramp going over. So we found these 4 very big trees, and you see the plan. Actually, the plan was studied for quite some long time until it reaches this simple state. This is the stone material collected on the site, and then these very big trees, we have to protect them in the process. And then the construction is very basic, I would say. The second building is this visitor welcoming center at the entrance of the Grand Canyon. This was also designed at the same time, almost the same periods. But of course, this one was, because it's a bigger building. The entrance of the canyon, there is this mountain, so we wanted to do something that's almost a landscape installation. So it has this slice of a rectangular volume that cuts into the hill and grows out. And the fact that I took a landscape studio here at GSD was very helpful, because because in Tibet, architecture is landscape. Landscape is also architecture. That's also to see it not only as just buildings. We have to always engage the topography and materiality and also plantation there. I wouldn't go too much into description of this. I know Frampton showed it last time he was, but it was also a lot of spirituality deliberately designed. I call this a stairway to heaven. We have these narrow walls and then with the skylight coming down. We're lucky that we were able to get 1 meter thick of stone masonry walls to build, and only with concrete reinforcement. And this is the section. This you see the existing slope. One of the interesting part of this building is we were able to draw resource of the masonry workers from Zhikaze, which is close to Ali area, to this area, because they are famous of building very nice masonry walls. So what we couldn't have designed these patterns, as it is, but the good thing is to give them the freedom of interpretate, involve into the building process. And of course, one of the biggest debate here was how to have something clearly contemporary without shouting out, which I think it's very easy nowadays to be loud and contemporary, but here we want to do something that's more quiet, more. But so as you know that in Tibet, because of all of the walls, masonry walls, they have to build thicker on the bottom and thinner on the top in order to, because it's just masonry. So here, one of the deliberate expression is we do the wall deliberately straight, so that it's to show that it's not one of these other vernacular buildings without too much of thought. The third building I'm showing here is Niyang River. This visitor center. It's along the other river that connects, that links to the Yalun Tsampu. And around 2008, I started something in my studio, which is an semi-individual studio, because the fact that now in China I was aware that you have a lot of great talent that come to work, but then it's impossible to get them anywhere in the world, that you have them stay in your office forever. So I decided to say, okay, why don't we speed it up? So after working in my studio for 4 years, I said, okay, And then I set up this semi-independent studio, which which is Zhao Yang's studio, who later was recommended by me to come to GSD. Now he also was part of the Rolex program a few years ago. So the idea here was to do something completely with wood structure, which is the other former two buildings was with a concrete reinforcement, and this one was taken the structural types exactly like the old houses in Tibet, and these are the wood beams, and to see if we can make completely contemporary building that nobody would doubt about it from even the first sight. You see this, the whole process of building is very humble, but in the end, the idea is at certain point stone can also fly. The weight of of course, this building, in the end, until now, it still remains to be one of the illegal buildings because we cannot get approval because it's a totally traditional structural typology that cannot get approved. If you don't use steel or concrete, you cannot get approval. So, yeah, it's one of the what we called it unauthorized buildings. The other building I'm going to show is this one is at the same time we also invited a young Portuguese office called Embaixada because one of my partner Claudia, she's landscape from GSD, one of my classmates, and then she's from Portugal. So we invited them to brainstorm for the first month, and then we came up with this very nice idea of having, this is one of the biggest boat terminal that it's similar to the other small one, which is this ramp going up and zigzag, sometimes as a waiting room, restaurant, and parking lots winding up to the boat driver's dormitory and their recreational space, a little auditorium and office, and go to the 3,000 meter for people to look back. I think this is totally a landscape, which is in Tibet is, of course, it's very strong of the site, but it's also part of their own building tradition, which is what they call Tianti, which is like stair, again, stair to heaven. So one of the interesting thing is actually all of the stone here used in this building we carved out of the site. So we don't have to ship a lot of materials from elsewhere. And this is after a few years, the rain and the season start to merge the building with the landscape. This thing, it's almost almost like a room, like aging effect, which of course we like very much. And again, clearly on the windows and details, we refuse to adopt any kind of the typical Tibetan kind of motif, because we had some debate. One thing I think it's interesting to do projects in this kind of culturally very strong background is what I say is this, to look eye to eye in the same level, because usually if you go to Tibet, there are two types of people, of course. Either you look up so much that you admire them before even you go there, and then you say, I copy. or you have this condescending attitude, say, I know so much, I'm from the advanced world, I give you something. So, but then, you know, we have to straightforwardly, I had debate with my friend Oh Yang and his friend Jingmei Wangjiu, who is Tibetan. So some of the younger Tibetan educated people would say, why don't you put the Tibetan thing here? You know, I said, okay, just wait and see. You know, maybe. And after it's built, they all like it. You know, this is more, I would say, the more subtle kind of contemporaneity and the cultural relevance. This is a bus station and art center. The art center, of course, was proposed by us because they wanted a big bus stop, and as well as a big tourist canteen. And then because the level has 2 levels, on one level higher, this level is the bus stop. So we have a big public toilet and canteen under. And here we made this kind of village-like street, which also resembles some of these big rocks up the hill. And yeah, because the fact this is one of the biggest building in the village, we don't want to make it look like so intrusive. Yeah, actually, when it's built, it works quite well. Reflections, you can see the village. And that's the kind of decorations that they have. The last building I want to show in Tibet is this. Actually, it's not building; it's this landscape. It was not a project in the plan before. But we were planning this route also when we drive by, and then on the back is this Nanchabawa, beautiful mountain. This is the Grand Canyon, and then this is this very old mulberry tree, which is the canopy is about 40 meters wide. So I talked to my friend Oh Yang, saying, why don't we make a place here that people can come here to contemplate. The original, how I persuaded it was say, maybe you can build a place that people can get married here. They said, oh great, you know, that's the idea. So that's how they got budget, but which is not too much. But originally it was very messy. It was, you know, the local people cut here, dig a lot of holes here to get earth or stone for construction. And so what we did was very minimal. We just cleaned it up and then with this light gray gravels to put it here. And then immediately it became a place. And so in a way, this tree and the mountain, because the cloud is always changing in the background. If you sit there for half an hour, it's ever changing. One of the interesting thing is a few years ago, 2 years ago, I went there, and it became one of the most popular sites for the whole route. And then there were people selling these gift stones, and there. So I talked to one of the ladies sitting there, the local ladies. I said, "Do you know who designed this?" And then she said, "Who?" I said, "I designed this." And she said, "Who cares? It's you know, it's our place." I think that's something that's great because, you know, it's if they feel like it's there, you know, it's been there for forever. I think that's a good compliment. You know, I don't think this kind of project can come back again, you know, because it's like a chance. So, you know, after a while, they start to put this scarf, which is worshipping the tree. It started to become some meaning of the place. I think that's a very nice compliment. And the other one is at the merge point of two rivers, they were planning to do a Vista Point, which I intended to design something that's a Vista Point that moves so people can see the movement of the two rivers in their movement, and then a Tibetan teahouse underneath. So they all liked it. We worked out all the construction document 2 years ago, but now the company already made some money. They have a lot of bureaucracies to control us. So and this building they calculated is 4 times of their budget. So they still haven't built it. But the idea is maybe at certain point we don't have to be totally limited to the idea of totally, so extremely humble. But at certain point we can go with stronger improvisations. And this is a small spa also got cancelled because of landsliding after our design, but of course this hot spring is natural, and the idea of this is very interesting. It's the concept of a spa. We asked the basic question: what's the spa ever we can have? And then it's among our 20 schemes, and this was the best answer. Said the best spa ever was us inside our mom's belly. So it's so this kind of protection. And this is a house which we designed on the top of one of the mountains. And it's kind of luxurious because whatever direction you see a snow mountain peak. So it's we linked these directions, but in the end, it's the first time we start to do these inward rooms. That's not just window; it's room that's cantilevered in between these two concrete walls. But in another aspect, the idea of the Chineseness or the Oriental feeling is, as opposed to the Western idea, is more of the inwardness. So also this didn't get built, but of course this idea got continued onward. It moves to, and after 7 years in Tibet, of course it still continue, but now in China the trend was all the architects start to go to the countryside. It's becoming more of the new trend and a new fashionable thing. So we said, okay, it's enough. It's time for us to move back to the center of the city. So we went back to the center of the city, and here we have in front of the Forbidden City and Tiananmen Square, we have this Dashla area, which is a historic area, and Baitas area, and also Hohai area. And on the east side, we have our first city wall project, which was our first project when we in 2001. This was when I was in 2001 when we first got started. This is there was an international competition of the city wall in Beijing. As you probably know, the city wall of Beijing got demolished in the 50s completely. And then by 2000, they suddenly discovered that there's one section that's still here by chance, about 1.5 kilometer in length, which is to the south of the railway station. They were kept because the workers' hut were built on top of the wall when they were constructing the railway station. So, and then the competition asked for ideas of what to do with the wall, and then of course, we did studies, surveys of the wall and life along the wall. Of course, we won the competition unanimously from the juries, because we were the only ones that, come on, not to do don't do anything to the wall. But for a competition, it's very daring, because everyone else was proposing a steel wall, a glass wall, a water wall, laser wall, whatever, you know. So, but our idea was to say the kind of raison d'être of the project is the wall is to show the evidence of the history itself, rather than to fake it. And then we proposed, this is part of the kind of urban design approach that we learned. We were proposing a south entry that linked to the subway, etc., with the south of the railway station, which is now built not exactly as beautiful as we designed, but more or less it's there. And then the wall is kept, and then we had a park around it. So for the art festival and design weeks and etc. So, and these trees, we surveyed it. Them. They didn't even have any documentation of the trees, which I think also benefited from my study of landscape here. I guess more of you would start to take landscape studios here. But we get awareness of how to document the trees on the. So it's now a quite popular public space. And then in the past 4 or 5 years, we start in these few areas. And this map shows, the blue line shows all the existing Hutong area here. The red line here shows the only thing that they decided that's conservation area. And this overlap shows these red parts are freshly demolished. If you look at the image, it looks like being bombed freshly last year. And of course, all of the projects that they were attempting would be replacing all these buildings, either fake courtyards or building 3 times more, because this is the developer's rule, which is 3-to-1 ratio, which to balance your budget. And we did about 2-year study of the strategy of how to, because they always have these big messy courtyard. We were studying how to subdivide them into a thinner slice so that it still form a kind of courtyard series, but then incorporating the people who choose to stay and introducing different programs. That's the original idea. And then the micro Hutong was the first, it was one of the slides that we realized. And that's 3 years ago when we did an exhibition, and also a plywood kind of mock-up. So the idea here is to have to keep all the boundaries of the wall and these informal additions that people built, and then to have the new grow out of the old. And then there was not a courtyard before, so we were able to create a new courtyard without increasing the building area, which is still between, I think it's just 35 to 40 square meters. And when it's finished, people immediately really like it, especially the kids. They really, whenever the door is open, they come in to occupy the space. And of course, the neighbors also, they come to see that they can even within the height limit, within the building area regulation, they can build 5 bedrooms with a toilet, and so theoretically this could house 2 families, which is the same area occupation as traditional residence. And here you can see we have a real full. There will be a curtain in the future, of course. Yeah. But the new one we get, it's very advanced. We have floor heating, we have double glazing, we have operable window skylight, and we have small windows for natural ventilation. So it's and central air conditioning, all hidden within this 35 square meter. You see here is where the air conditioning coming in with the central air conditioning. So it's very humble building, 35 square meter, but with all the contemporary comfortness incorporated. Of course, I'm going to talk later about the material we are experimenting, which is to mix Chinese ink with concrete. So it comes with this dark gray that works more continuously with the typical Beijing gray brick. So now we are planning that there may be some international architect or artist residents that could program there, that they do 3 months of residence there, that they can interact with the local people to make some art, and then there will be some exhibition. So that's what's planned. The other project I'm going to show today also is this Yuan'er, Micro Yuan'er, children's library and art center. As you can see here, this is another kind of typical big messy courtyard situation. And but this Char Hutong is also a more quiet Hutong area, and then next to it is this one of the important mosque in Xiamen area called Xiamen Mosque. And we also did some interesting study, because in the old city of Beijing, actually most of the local people don't even realize that traditionally there are lots of Muslim residents, occupation from Kublai Khan time. The old residents of Beijing are mostly Muslim, and then now they become more and more discreet. They don't show the dress, but they are. In terms of all the religion and belief, and it's a very interesting discovery. And even within our courtyard, there are 2 families. So the idea here is, I will show the other, I wouldn't show these models, but you can see that the idea here is the big messy courtyards. In the beginning, it's 1 family. After in the 70s, from 50 to through the 80s, it's subdivided into about a dozen families. So every family start to build a small kitchen for themselves. And these kitchens are, where is the, yeah, here. So you can see it, these are the kitchens. And this kind of situation exists in almost every big courtyard in Beijing. But traditionally now in all of the operations, they're automatically removed to go back to, say, 100 years ago. But we were trying to test that maybe this is the most interesting contemporary urban spatial fact that shouldn't be forgotten. And what we can do is maybe to introduce with some, there's a few families still living in, to introduce some public program. We were negotiating with the owner, which is the government there. And by inserting a small children's library, this was here because this was the only space available in the beginning. And then we redesigned this garbage pile-like space into a step that a small gallery for children, and it started to grow. It's a process. It's not something that's designed in at once. It's been for 4 years. So, of course, we studied that one of the important population in this area is children and old people. And of course, to design something for children always we thought might work, but we were not sure in the beginning because they don't know what to do. We were coming up with this program proposal. But as soon as we finished even the first phase, it's immediately occupied, and then all the neighborhood kids, they come, and then old people also come. So actually, this boy with the helmet was the grandson of Mr. Hai, he's the one that take care of our day-to-day operation. And this stair winding up to these sitting platforms, it takes a lot of time to design these small things. Sometimes I compare this to like solo playing or in a big orchestra. This is like solo playing. It takes more time for me to design this than to design a 20,000 square meter building. And these are the the test for the ink added concrete. These are the bricks we are comparing to the gradual color texture change. Here you can see some of the pictures from inside, outside. Basically, I was at the time I was traveling around the world and doing a lot of these communication with the team. I see some people here who also worked in my studio. Yeah, they really improvise a lot into the space. Actually, during 1 month ago, we were there, and then this was not planned. This man, he was the one-man band in the next Hutong. So they were invited. He was playing for the old people and some people, obviously, from the outside. Some of the students in the studio, actually. But they really use it. Also, this 2/3 of this temple space, the other 1/3 is still occupied by one family. So we proposed this multifunctional, also dancing space, and they start to this is completely not planned. They just, and you see these pictures are taken by one of the kids themselves. We just gave them because they look at your. The way that they look into your eyes is different because it's it's one of the kids took the picture. Yeah, it's really close to the Forbidden City. Here you see the Chemen Tower actually in the night. For Venice Biennale, I just quickly show some images. We brought the idea, and of course it's all precasted into pieces and then assemblable. So it's a lot of redesign because we have to be able to cut these into 6 pieces and then put into container, consider all the opening width in order to get into the arsenale and all these. Of course, this huge concrete beam was hollow in the center, so it's not and this one, we use light concrete, so it's the weight of it is half of the weight of concrete. And also, when you go there, you can touch it, and then there's a smell of Chinese ink. So the space evaporates around the installation. Okay, now it goes beyond. There's some projects. This is a tea house we did in 2008, also in the countryside with local sandstones. And of course, the roof in Sichuan, you know, all the buildings were open to the air. So we use traditional this wooden structure form. But the only request I did to the contractor was to remove these 2 columns so that it looks like this is floating there. I always include this project into my presentation because this was our first baby. 2004, we first built it. I would say that this is for auditorium building for a primary school, elementary school in Beijing, in the east side, outskirts of Beijing. It was donated by one of the developers who took part of the school's land for their housing. So they gave 2 million to build this 500-seat auditorium, only 2 million. And so they don't care what it looks like. And then the school doesn't care as far as they get a building. So we got this gap of nobody cares. And we got it, I designed it in about just 2 weeks. And but of course, I had a lot of anger because at the time when I just got back to China, I didn't like a lot of other architects because they're either, you know, copying, imitating, you know, big stars like Rem or Zaha Hadid, or, you know, it's copying. Or the other aspect is they're so conservative, the old LDI group, they're not open to any. So there's a degree of anger that when we first started. I guess here the young students also have this. When you first started, you say, come on, I'm better than these guys, but they get more projects than us. So, but the idea is, of course, it's almost a confrontation between the old building and then there's a plaza. So it's and the funny thing is, of course, when it's finished, a lot of people like it, but the parents don't let the kids going down here because they felt like the wall would. Of course, it's not, because we did a small structural trick. We buried another half of a concrete wall on the ground, so it's the same length here. So it's safe. And originally, the plan was more zigzagging. But then, after discussion, the budget was so small that we cannot do too much of these. So we could kind of reversed it into sections, and then, of course, this is the house, the stage, and the lobby, and the entrance. So it's, it coincides with these three elements. And on the plan, it's extremely rational with house, stage, lobby, and then the service space. But it's not symmetrical, so it's off-center deliberately. Anyway, so we got lucky to. The other one was also an early building, which we did with almost calligraphy, Chinese ink. I always wanted to experiment this kind of almost intuitive movement, that how this could project into architecture. But of course, to do this is very easy. It's like 3 minutes, but then we suffered for 6 months trying to realize it. But that's how architecture and life is about. I wouldn't go too much into it because this is already 10 years ago, more than 10, 12 years ago. A tower, of course, in here we have to show one tower I did. This is not very tall, it's 150 meter high. It's just very thin. Its typical floor is just 400 square meters. It's one of these. But then the discourse here is about, for the towers, there's so much vertical freedom already expressed, but the horizontal kind of freedom is not explored enough. And this is a real project, so each floor is a unit, and then 360 degrees of view and some terraces shifting. That was 2007. We got the complete DD. They start construction already, and then there was the 2009 crisis, and then they stopped it. Actually, if they built it, it would be, they would have, because 2012 it went back, And the other building was social housing, which we did together with other 9 architects, 5 from Holland, 5 from China. Social housing with Zhang Ke. Of course, the discourse here is to say, these are super dense. The building between each other is just 8 meters. So we said, okay, let's build one space for everyone. So this is a theater that could be food market or improvisation, etc. So, because social theater housing, it's only 15 square meter per unit. But social housing doesn't have to be sad looking always. So that's one of the idea. The other, the only crazy idea we had was about this village mountains. We did a research. This shows the agricultural land of China, and these are the only actually available area. And then in the Yangtze River and Yellow River Delta, this area, this is the more productive, where also big cities are expanding extremely fast. So we did this research also 4 years ago. And then this shows the decline of the Chinese agricultural land, farmland. And per capita, Chinese per capita farmland is the smallest compared to US. It's 5 times bigger. Canada is more than 10 times bigger. In the past 15 years, we lost 8%. Actually, that's until 2010. Until now, I would say 10%, which means that we lost the ability of raising 100 million population. It's a big thing, a big problem in China. And this was what's going on in China. It's the farmland and becoming like this, buildings and expansion. So our proposal, of course, is crazy, but the idea is not to build it. The idea is to say, okay, come on, let's build villages upwards, but these are not skyscrapers to show off power, money, but it's something that's built for ordinary people, that they can build their own houses. Or like this is New York, you know, but can we do something that's not just, you know, the same typology? So each of these towers would be, say, 3 villages housing. And of course, there's a lot of digital helping with this. And so 2012, we proposed this to Milan Design Week, which is showed in the main exhibition called the Stadale, where also, I think the year before was Zaha there in the same. And they said, you're crazy, you cannot build it. But we did it, of course. What we did, we hired a whole Boeing 747 UPS to ship this thing there. We are crazy, yes. But it was, people really enjoyed it because it becomes one of the, you know, the piece that they still remember. And later they brought it to the marble city Carrara. And then they, as Milan Design Week, sent back to the Beijing Design Week to this Ai Weiwei space. So, but also after this, I also conceived an idea of the studio for 1 km high habitat. So it's not 1 km high building. There are some very interesting student work I am not going to show here. Installation I did for Design Week in Milano for Moroso, 60 years anniversary. One of the interesting things of the Western perception of China is they always want to see explicit Chineseness. And then they call it water dragon. I said, okay, but I'm not going to show you a dragon. So it's I call it invisible hidden dragon. So this project is a hidden dragon. Of course, we also designed the sofa, which is reverse, the sofa to sit back to back. And those I'm not. And this building is more serious. It's we just finished for Swiss Novartis Campus. It actually took me 6 years. The first 3 years were almost 50% of time working on this because they don't allow us to publish, so it's all almost secret. Now in June, it's finally inaugurated. The idea here is the kind of organic cellular system. This almost, you know, that's the parameter of this system is what because one thing I want to say is in my high school I was super into physics and mathematics. I never thought to be an architect, but somehow, you know, mistakenly I'm in. But this module of system, the basic geometry that can create those possibility always fascinate me. And so here we're lucky. We're probably the only building in Novartis campus that has this crazy interior network inside. But also this became what I started the same day with Aravena. Our building are facing each other. It's good because he has a complete solid building. I have a complete transparent, but inside it's a system. The idea here is to have this system, but not a system that's just let the system to work, but to have a lot of human interaction, which is not like you have a system, then it's nice. The parameter needs a lot of personal interaction, adjustment to make the space interesting. Of course, this is another kind of Chineseness idea, is totally inward, with 5 courtyards that winds up the stair into a roof garden. We were very lucky because we got great support from. We have Terry Bell who worked with Frank Gehry for many years. He also hired Gehry Technology to rationalize our curtain walls, and interior design support also from. We designed it until DD, and then CD was EXH, who's half Swiss. But the movement inside so the inside is also a landscape. And we also get, so these glasses each are 5 meter high, triple glazing, open joint. The larger piece are around 10 square meters. So we selected. I went to Milan to select all the furnitures and lighting, and so that's the other extreme. That like we do. Besides the humble ones in the city of Beijing and Tibet, also. Last one is my office. Which was to the north of Forbidden City. We redesigned the inside. So it's another inside-out approach. And this was a picture taken 2 years ago. But it's a casual picture. But in Shanghai, we have people from Denmark, Sweden, Italy, Puerto Rico, and girl from Germany. And so it's me still very much of anger. Thank you. Okay, time-wise, I did okay.
Yeah. Just a few. We'll take a couple of questions or comments for Ke. How do you stand these lights?
I pretend that.
Is there some? Yeah. Maybe I'll just break the ice a little. Especially in the Beijing projects, but it's implicit in the Tibet projects too. You talked a lot about the way the kind of use of the buildings, the courtyards, but even quickly the sort of the last projects, the bigger projects. If you look at them, you think they're really, really formally and materially highly considered, even exaggerated, let's say, and yet there is this social life that clearly concerns you. And usually those things, or let's say often those things diverge. Could you just say a little bit about, in terms of design process and consideration, this concern for the social life of the building versus the formal and material life, and how they enforce each other, fight each other? How do you reconcile that?
This is quite sophisticated question, of course. I think one fact, I would just answer it according to what I understand. One fact is when you start to consider the social aspect, it becomes so much into the social statement that the design got dimmed or got not so much inspiring. And the other side is when you start to say, I'm designing something new, which is very common and easy nowadays. It happens in every city, old city, is if you want to be new, it's very easy. You just simply shout out. But then if you can say, I concern, but the departure point is social concern. But social concern also means that the design also have to be innovative to make this social concern valid. Otherwise, very often you see the kind of sad design or using social concern as a selling point. But I think that's not so interesting for us. For us, it's more interesting to see if there's a new typology that we can create that other people could be inspired, and also to convince the municipality as well as the citizens or the neighborhood to say, oh, we can actually do this. This is the thing that, because if you see this garbage-like a situation, if you don't realize it, people will not be able to see. And when people don't see, even professionals will not be able to get convinced that this is a kind of possibility that actually can work. So I think one thing that the Planning Bureau also in the end decide to approve both of our schemes in the end, but they said these are approved officially as an experiment, not as a pliable methodology to ever, because they cannot say all the unauthorized additions will be now officially authorized. So it's you have to do a lot to realize one example to be convincing. So I guess we're just trying, but.
Hi. My question is about your use of the word Chineseness, and that's a word that's sort of loaded. Oftentimes, Western architects are asked to do projects in China, and it seems like anything goes, except that sometimes they map a kind of Western idea of what is Chinese onto the Chinese context, like the Jinmao building, for example. This is SOM turning a skyscraper into a pagoda, and I find that sort of simplistic and a kind of caricature. I'm struck by the way you use it in your own work to sort of fight back on these kind of easy kind of mappings or associations. And I'm also intrigued by the way you work in a Chinese mode outside of China, like the Italian projects, where you can sort of redefine the term, what does it mean to be Chinese, by still with a very Chinese touch, I would say, refuse to produce the kind of standard image of a Chinese project. So I find it really refreshing to see the Novartis project and the Italian projects. Could you talk more about Chineseness and this sort of transactions between East and West and the kind of expectations for your work and how you sort of fight them in your more sophisticated way than the kind of easy mappings?
Yes, of course, the word Chineseness exists outside of China, of course. It's like, I guess if you talk to Herzog and de Meuron, they wouldn't be happy to talk about, oh, the Swissness or the Dutchness of Rem's work, these things. But I think how come Chineseness we have to address, but somehow if my attitude is, if you turn it around, but the Chineseness not as a form, but as a sensibility, but as a more oriental, more dated back of thinking, of ideas that we can draw inspiration. It's like contemporaneous. When we do buildings in the old city, also how to do the contemporaneous in a way that is more quiet contemporaneous, more subtle. So I would say the more subtle Chineseness, not as an iconographical way, but it could be inspirational. For example, we have a lot of inward space that could also be inspiring to the West. So I think that the new time is start to emerging, that the Chineseness is no longer recognized as the dragon play, the red of the color. These are kitsch. So I think the new generation and the elder generation has difference. the elder generation probably has the pressure of to show off or even selling the Chineseness abroad, and or to say, oh, I have to show something Chinese so that they can be able, for the people who've never been to China, would say the explicit Chineseness. But that's no longer something that interests our new generation. I believe the people who sit here also agree a lot with that. Hi, Maria.
I know that that we had this conversation before, but it's maybe worth kind of talking about it a little bit. So the question is, I am very intrigued about this discontinuity that you are creating in your architecture using traditional techniques. So, for example, you allow the continuity through building that walls, but then if you're attentive, you see that you use concrete or this, floating structures that are kind of disrupting continuity. So is this a conversation that is in a way interesting, and how is this happening in the more recent projects, or is it more difficult in the project like the more recent buildings?
The continuity, you mean the continuity of the
knowledge of construction? You allow that wall to be constructed by the local people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think these. I talk about this in China. We always should be aware of the availability of the builders and contractors. So I think there will be somehow the design, what I call tolerance. So to tolerance the imprecision in order to achieve the kind of precision or visual logic. So I think that's. I think this I would say curated continuity rather than designed it. So, but that means that we have to be aware of it. So, I guess that's the point. That's interesting question.
Last one.
Okay. Thank you for lecture today. I'm just curious about one question, maybe not really related to today's lecture. Like in China, there's a lot of newly built commercial street that built in Asian architecture style, but some people just claim that they are fake Asian buildings. Like, what's your viewpoint towards those buildings that they're newly built, but they really look like the Asian style, but not as good as our Asian traditional buildings?
Oh, so you mean Asian or ancient?
Oh, sorry.
There are Asian buildings, of course. But
like all the buildings.
Yeah, that's the other kind of in the kitsch I'm talking about. But it doesn't only exist in China. If you go to Europe, you see it also. The tourist area you see in the U.S. also. So I think in China we just enlarge the effect to make it more drastic. But I don't know what I can say about it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question about the landscape that you've been referring to like a couple of times. Like you said that some projects are landscape itself, and sometimes the architecture also becomes the landscape. And I think that inspires me a lot, and I wonder how is that related to the Chineseness or the Chinese culture, because as like Western trained, we rarely talk about like a lot about the relationship between the nature and the buildings, but I think that's very inherent in a lot of the Asian Chinese projects, and I personally take that as a reference back to like the traditional like garden making and also the tradition of architecture. Although like in China we don't necessarily have a concept of architecture until like very recent. So I mean, yeah, I'm just wondering what's your take on like the relationship between nature and building, and then what's your definition of the landscape and how that could transform into architecture? Yeah, thanks.
Last week we were talking in Dubai about pushing the boundaries, because architecture is such an ancient profession. It's probably 3,000. Michael probably knows better how many. It's one of the most ancient profession that still exists. But then somehow we also have to push the boundaries that architecture to go over to landscape, to product design, to planning, to interior. For me, I think even the Bauhaus tradition is everything is architecture, but architecture, of course, landscape doesn't mean it's just outdoor. You mentioned the Chinese garden, of course, it's continuous sequence of experience, no matter if it's outdoor or indoor. Now it's also the experience of from Google Earth. That's also part of landscape or architecture. But I really think that the integration, the crossing boundary of all the disciplines is necessary for architecture to still be exciting. I was talking about the Renaissance time, that architecture was cutting edge technology because you have to build, Michelangelo has to build this 100-meter high one space, one dome. That's technology. It's rocket science, So, but I think here we also have the opportunity to do things, push that. I really think it's not just doing some buildings.